Welcome, everyone. We are so happy to have you at our annual Business of Flight Week set of festivities. Today's event is being brought to you by our Business Leadership Board, and it's a panel dedicated to marketing in the aviation and aerospace industry. And without further ado, I will hand there's no mic, over to Professor Scott Ambrose, and he will share our panelists, and thank you for being here.
All right, if you guys cannot hear me, just let me know. I'll try to talk loud enough, but we're so welcome to have you guys here. And it's an exciting time for us because we just recently launched a new marketing major in aerospace and aviation within our undergraduate program of air transport. So we're very excited to have done that, and then to have this panel here with us to talk about marketing today. So as you guys know me, I see lots of familiar faces, students. I always start off every semester, every class, whether it's undergraduate, graduate, or doctorate level class, with some management advice, some sage advice from the late Peter Drucker, right? One of his favorite quotes given over half a century ago is the purpose of a business is to create and to keep a customer, right? So create and keep a customer, purpose of the business. And I think we lose sight of that foundation from time to time, but I'm really excited because as such, we have 5 great panelists who've done a lot already in their careers to create and keep a customer. And what I'm going to do is just briefly go around the room and introduce them, and then we'll go back through and let them give you a little bit more rich background of themselves. So we'll start with Mr. Rick Larson over here. He's from EAA, Vice President of Communities, right, and programs for that. We've got David Kelly right here, Vice President of Marketing and Strategy at HAECO.
Yep, thank you.
And we've got Ms. Paula Park here, and she's with Interiors Marketing Manager for Collins, right? And then virtually, we've got joining us Mega Badia, and she is coming to us sales and marketing from Rolls-Royce, their business division. And then last but not least, joining us virtually, Heather Sant. She is the director of the loyalty program at American Airlines. So they're very excited to have you. And I think I'll start it back off with Rick.
Sure. So Rick Larson, I've been at EA now about 18 years. But my career, I've been fortunate where my career has spanned a number of different areas. Last 18 years has been general aviation, basically, focused on general aviation at EAA. About half that time was split initially as Vice President of Marketing. And now I've got the outward facing side of EAA. So all of our programming, all of our chapters, all of our youth ed programming, museum, air venture, to a pretty significant degree, all falls in our area. But again, my career is split in that the prior 20 some years I spent in the commercial airline industry. So first with Midway Airlines in Chicago, ultimately as director of market planning, but I started off in maintenance. And then with ATA in Indianapolis for about a dozen years as vice president of marketing. Started my career outside of marketing altogether, even though that was a goal I had when I left here. Started at Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach as an engineer. Did that for a couple of years, knew that's not what I wanted to do long term, and ultimately, found my way into the airline industry. So, I feel fortunate. I'm an Embry-Riddle grad. I mentioned it in a couple of classes. There were 4 of us back a lot of years ago that were the first 4 to graduate on campus with a master's degree from Embry-Riddle. It was an MBA in aviation. We were the first 4 to go through the program, and all of us went on and have spent long careers in the industry. And I look back on it, and Embry-Riddle has enabled me to spend my entire career doing nothing but being around airplanes, around aviation, around something I really got a passion for. So it's been a great launching pad for me.
So I'm David Kelly. I'm also an alumni. I actually was an aeronautical science major. I was a pilot. Graduated with my flight instructor license in 2003, but that was after the post 9/11 downturn. And I couldn't even get a job at Embry-Riddle as a flight instructor, even though I had given them plenty of my hard-earned cash, at least my parents had. So moved back to Tampa and found a job as a flight instructor at a flying club. Never had more than 3 students, but in order to stay on my parents' health insurance, I had to take at least 3 college credit hours. My parents happened to be professors at St. Leo University, so I could go for free. And I thought, well, what do I take? And I looked at the catalog and I said, well, marketing sounds easy. So I decided to take a marketing class, and then I kind of figured, well, I might actually be good at this, and then ended up sticking through the whole program and got a second undergrad degree in marketing. Ended up as an analyst at Volvo Aero Services, doing inventory analysis, market forecasting, and trying to explain to them that their $10 million worth of JT8D blades were not still worth $10 million, and they didn't really want to hear it. So ended up at BE Aerospace as a market intelligence manager, doing a lot of the forecasting and analytics. Then from BE, before it was acquired by Collins, which is where Paula works, won't spoil that for you, moved over to HAECO, which is Hong Kong Aircraft and Engineering Company. So we're the world's largest independent aircraft maintenance provider, and we also make aircraft cabin interiors like airplane seats, lavatories, galleys, things like that. And that's where I currently am.
I like that we're getting honest. I'm not an alum. I actually fell into aviation and aerospace by accident, by complete chance. I was trying to be a scientist, and I just a chance meeting with the wife of an executive at Honda changed my life forever. I started my career at Honda Aircraft and asking questions, and turns out I've made an entire career of asking why people do things or researching why people do things. And that took me from Honda. I was working as a marketing analyst there, asking why do people buy business jets and where did they buy business jets, and okay, why would they buy there versus anywhere else? That led me to BE Aerospace, where I met David Kelly when we were in our mid-20s. And we actually were analysts there at BE Aerospace for some time. I went off to Crane Aerospace and Electronics, and I was doing demand management, which was actually in the marketing department. So you can see there's, a lot of different jobs you can have there. And then I got a call from David Kelly. He was setting up a marketing department at HAECO Americas, and he needed a director. So I worked from there, and that was really something. We set up communication networks, both internal and external. We were doing press releases. We were doing all of the marketing stuff that we really weren't trained for. And, neither one of us had ever done communications or press releases and event planning. We were really more the technical and like strategic marketing. So we really took kind of a turn there, but it was an incredible experience. And then I ended up back at Collins, which is kind of funny because it's the old BE Aerospace was purchased and, brought into Collins Aerospace. And but now I work for Raytheon Technologies in Collins Aerospace in the interiors department.
All right, very good. Maggie, I'll turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about it.
I suppose I'm continuing the business jet theme over here. Okay, well, let me start off with the beginning. So Embry-Riddle alum, and I got my bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering, actually. And then I was in my last semester of engineering, and I think I had I did have a business minor at the time. And I found out that I really enjoyed business, so I went ahead and did my MBA at Embry-Riddle as well. So a little bit of both. And I think I found the perfect program to join Rolls-Royce, actually with an on-campus recruitment. And they were recruiting for a customer management leadership program at Rolls-Royce. And they still have that program today, albeit it's named a little differently, along with engineering and a few others. And so that was the perfect cocktail for me because it was an engineering company, but it definitely applied the business principles and offered roles in sales, marketing, customer management, customer business. And the idea was you would rotate from place to place and business to business to try and get a breadth of expertise. And so I definitely bounced around a little bit within the company, and that was by choice and by design. So I took on a commercial role at first, which was looking at contracts, but then quickly moved on to sales and marketing, which the role was not designed for marketing, but it definitely integrated both of those elements because you're working to develop a service offering or a sales offering, and you can't do that until you understand the market and the market segmentation. So it worked to apply. That was my first introduction to marketing, so to speak. Anyways, fast forward, I've worked in sales, marketing. I've worked with Rolls-Royce now over 12 years. I think I'm coming on to my 13th anniversary. And now I look after sales and marketing, but I kind of went around the wheel of customer business where I did sales, customer service, marketing, and then, full circle. Now I'm looking after sales and marketing for the business jet division. So there you go.
Last but not least, Heather.
Hi, everyone. I wish I was in Daytona Beach talking to you, but hopefully you can see this is actually the American Airlines campus. And so we've built a fabulous campus for our frontline and management team, calling you from there today. I've been with American, and actually dawned on me this morning, 18 years. Wow, it goes by like that. I am an Embry-Riddle grad. I have a degree in aviation business administration, and I started my airline career at a little airline, America West, working in the revenue management team. And that airline clearly is now grown much bigger, in merger with US Airways, which was fascinating to be a part of, still in a revenue management capacity. But at that point in time, I was known to my family as the bag lady. I was responsible for ancillaries, so the introduction of bag fees and seat fees, and now what we have is a multi-billion-dollar part of our business. With the merger with American, I was still in a revenue management capacity, but I was overseeing things like corporate contracting and kind of fare distribution. And my last role in revenue management was overseeing our transatlantic and trans-Pacific businesses, which was fascinating. Awesome opportunity to talk to what was previous competitors, but through antitrust joint ventures, getting an opportunity to have collaborative conversations there. I've also, like Mega, kind of bebopped around the company. I moved on after that to run our network planning long-range fleet strategy team. And so that was purchasing aircraft, which was incredibly fascinating. And thankfully, you cannot do that by yourself. There are a lot of people involved whenever you purchase an aircraft. And you don't just buy a seat. The HAECO and Collins people can tell you that. You don't just buy a seat. It's very interesting. But from there, the past 3 years, I've had the privilege of running the Advantage program, which is the biggest marketing arm. Any of the loyalty programs are massive marketing arms for the major airlines. So much so that during the pandemic, when every airline was really worried about would we survive, what would happen, we were able to actually use the loyalty program, the Advantage program, to acquire $10 billion of assets, and liquidity to the company, which was fascinating and highly interesting to be involved in. And then news story, as of last week, I've actually transitioned to a new role. So I don't even think that Rick and others know that, but I am now overseeing our operations transformation at American, reporting to our chief operating officer. So I've had kind of an eclectic background, and I don't think I ever would have thought I would start in marketing or be in marketing, but it was probably the highlight of my career to date. So happy to be on the panel. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congrats on your
Thank you. Thank you.
And as you guys see, especially for the students, I don't think any of our panelists, when they first started college, had ideas of marketing in their future. And yet they all ended up in marketing sort of along the way. So we have a aerospace engineer. David was in the pilot program here. And I'll just kind of turn it over to you, Paula. And so you got your undergrad in psychology, right?
Yeah, I
Okay,
did.
so obviously those folks who have me in marketing, and we spend a lot of time talking about psychology. How did that?
Well, I was studying psychology because I was going to try to be a neuroscientist, right? That's what I went to grad school to be. And it was a lot of numbers. It was a lot of, looking at trends and watching behavior and documenting. And I loved the coursework, but at the end, like my job was 8 hours in a dark closet with a microscope. That's all I did. And I counted brain cells all day long. It was awful. It was the worst job ever. And one of my research studies, just by chance, one of the people enrolled in my studies turned out to be the wife of an executive of Honda Aircraft Company. And I had to meet her several times. And, I had mentioned that this wasn't my dream job. And she was like, you know what? My husband is hiring a ton of people. You should meet him. And that's how it happened. And that's how my entire aviation career started. It gets in your skin and then you just can't leave it. You'll never find anything as interesting. And even if you think you're in the most interesting job yet, all of a sudden you turn a corner. I mean, I never thought it would get better than Honda. And at BE, we were doing so many crazy things with coffee maker studies and labs, and we were having so much fun. And then even at HAECO, we were just starting over, doing an entire rebranding. I mean, it's really taken me just all over the place. So I always say, if you're looking at business degrees and marketing, it's such a transferable set of skills that I think you're in a good spot. You can do a lot of things.
Absolutely. So we'll go around it. I mean, Rick, share what's been your most rewarding experience in marketing in your career so far?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to just jump back for a second. So I might be the only one on the panel that when I was here at Riddle, my undergraduate was air studies, air transportation management. Again, stayed on and got my MBA. But it was a marketing class that I had with Bruce Chadburn, who was a longtime professor here, where at one point the light bulb did seem to go off. And it was, this marketing thing for a whole lot of reasons, as Paula has mentioned, just sounds really interesting. I think that's what I want to go do. And I walked out of here with the desire of, at some point, I want to go run marketing in an airline. As we've talked in a lot of classes over the last couple of days as a BLB, you can be here at Embry-Riddle and you're here and you believe this is where you want to be. You can almost assuredly know it will never be a straight line. And so, I walk out of here, graduate, and airlines were not hiring at the time. It was the first of the real big fuel crises and that. But Douglas Aircraft is on campus interview. And I thought, well, I'll go interview for the heck of it. I mean, good interview practice. Never interviewed me for engineers. I don't have an engineering degree. I go interview with them. 2 weeks later, I get an offer from Douglas Aircraft. And a month later, we're living out in Los Angeles or out in the Irvine area of Southern California. And I was with Douglas for 2 years doing engineering. That got me into the airline side because I talked my way into a position with Midway Airlines in maintenance. But I knew that, okay, now that got me into the airline side. I want to get into marketing. And my first job in marketing was, I talked my way into a position as manager of pricing for Midway Airlines. So I had this zigzag, and all of a sudden I found myself in the marketing department. But I think the story there is, look at all kinds of opportunities when you're out there. They'll come along and, but it's never going to be necessarily a straight line. It's 99% chance that that first company you go to work for isn't going to be where you retire from. You know, but there's a lot of opportunities along the way. So to your question, what was most rewarding, you know, when I look back on my career, when I joined ATA, we were the largest charter airline in the United States. And at the time it was starting to dabble a little bit, trying to do scheduled service in a very unorthodox way. And so I moved from Midway to ATA with the prime responsibility initially of transforming how the airline functioned and really developing a true scheduled service component for the airline. And that meant creating a brand. Paula mentioned rebranding. As a charter carrier, we didn't have a brand out there. We didn't need a brand. Our brand was Pleasant Hawaiian Holidays. It might be the US military. It might be whoever was chartering us. All of a sudden it was time to go create a brand. And, you know, I can remember distinctly, we were going back in and we were trying to replicate, we were going to go replicate what Midway Airlines had been doing at Midway Airport, which was a lot of leisure destinations. And I went ahead and hooked up with a guy that was creative at the agency that we had used at Midway, really good guy. If you've ever seen Be Like Mike commercials, that was Bernie's deal. And he goes, let's go, we need to go figure out this brand thing. And we had a meeting in a warehouse in Chicago one night. I took my director of marketing with me. And in one meeting, we literally laid out the foundation for the brand, overall brand going forward, what the tagline was going to be, what we would potentially be doing with our in-flight service and our product overall. And it happened in one night over about a 5-hour period, sitting in some dingy warehouse in Chicago. But it's the thing I look back on because it set the foundation for the airline for the next 5 or 6 years and allowed us to take, you know, something that was, you know, sched service at the time was, you know, and not even $1 million, you know, business for us. And 5 or 6 years later, you know, we were doing $500 million and ultimately $1.4 billion in sched service. It was one meeting that started that. And that's the stuff when Paula talks about all the different things you can do in marketing, it's stuff like that. And I look back on that as probably one of the coolest things that I had the opportunity to go do.
David, I'll throw it over to you. Either your connection to marketing and did you think it was going to happen, or just talk about the most rewarding experiences you've had thus far?
Yeah, so the connection actually started with an internship at Continental Airlines where I was a flight ops intern. So unpaid, we were paid in flight simulator hours. So I have a high altitude and high performance endorsement and an MD-80 in my logbook, which is pretty cool. Didn't pay me a dime. But what we were doing is research on, so the internship program was separate research projects. So I was doing research on hypoxia and whether or not if one of the pilots leaves the flight deck and the other has to put his oxygen mask on, is that really safer than giving every other pilot whatever rhinovirus they had to cough into the mask that day. So did regressions in terms of altitude and times of useful consciousness and you know, how long someone could survive at a given altitude with an explosive decompression and whether or not it was worthwhile at which altitude to have the mask on. So that was when I sort of realized that I'm not bad at this whole research thing, and throw the spreadsheets in a PowerPoint, make a presentation and make it worthwhile. And then I fast forward later into my career where at BE Aerospace, I had this forecast model that would tell us, you know, how many airplane seats would be retrofitted in the world and when, and how many American would buy from us. It was a lot, thank you. But that model, since we're a publicly traded company, I could only use that model to put in the 10K or the annual report and say, this is how much we're going to grow. So when I left BE, I was able to go to HAECO and say, hey, this model can identify by customer who's going to buy, what the likelihood is that they're going to buy new seats and when. Then we can target those customers, take them to our new trade show booth, get them to follow us on social media where we actually track them and our users, not just post like, hey, happy Father's Day. And then we can tell who's at our trade show booth. And when we scan their badge, it used to just be, okay, well, here's who we're going to send direct mail to because they came to our booth. No, we've got a lanyard that says their name and their title. Now we know if they're decision makers or not. So we can track who the decision makers are. Then we bring them back, we put them into our CRM that we rolled out and expanded. We can track through the CRM what becomes a lead, what becomes, you know, an opportunity. And then we can track when it closes and how much that means for the backlog and how much future business we have. So it went from taking a fun little tool that was part of something just to prove a stock price, to taking something and saying, no, this is how we find customers and this is how we win.
Thank you.
Hey, if you don't mind me jumping in, just some things that from my perspective, in school, marketing to me, I was guilty of putting it into a box of its brand, its colors and creativity and kind of all the warm feeling things. As someone who likes hard numbers and 1 + 1 is 2 and that type of world, I never really gravitated towards what I had defined as marketing. But now, hopefully you've heard that from my fellow panelists, it is about data, right? It is about figuring out how I have a hypothesis. I'm going to research. I'm going to try to figure out how do I need to adjust my product or my service based upon my customers or my future customers. And so for me, once I kind of allowed myself to get rid of my prior version of what I understood to be marketing, I really realized that it's such a passion of mine, even though now I've moved to the ops space, but understanding customers, and customers are fascinating and you can't really always solve for them, right? They're always going to do something a little bit different that makes you go, huh, how should I adjust now moving forward? So if you're someone that's constantly looking for different types of problems that you want to solve, and also something that's meaningful, because generally if you're marketing, you're not marketing to something that is non-human, right? You're marketing to an individual. So if that person is going to go out and buy your product or buy your service, they're doing it for a need, right? Or some reason to enrich their life. So for me, I definitely did not see myself being in marketing. Whenever I graduated, I had, decided to do the pilot route, and then I switched. Maybe that was a bad decision considering what we're talking about, paying pilots these days. David, I think you might need to go and, rethink some things, but definitely don't constrain your view of marketing into what a marketing field actually is in the marketplace.
Yeah, if I may jump in, I think that's really well said. There was also something I think one of the panelists said, which is it's a transferable set of skills. I think another way to look at it is almost every role except for this one that has marketing in the title, every other role, and I've held a few at Rolls-Royce, didn't have the word marketing in it. I didn't go into the role, understanding that I'm going to be doing marketing, but it is so wholly integrated in what you're trying to do because it comes down to understanding the market space. It comes down to understanding the customers. It comes down to creating customers. I really love what you said there in the beginning, Scott. It's creating the customer and then keeping it and understanding what are the different factors you're working with. And some of that is very much driven by data. And then some of that is and then there's a data-driven approach. And then there's another element which is more sales or sales support related, which is being able to create a brand awareness. It's being able to imprint on the minds of the customers. Yes, the customers have an idea of what they want, but then there's also space for you to create an idea for what they want. And there's very much, and that can play into creative elements, and that can also be integrated with data. So there's this, you can bounce back and forth, and there's such a wide, broad spectrum for marketing. So I'll give you an example. So you were talking about rewarding elements for marketing. And when I took this job on, we had just launched a new service for our customer base. And well, we launched it in 2019, and guess what happened after that? COVID. So we launched a new service. We barely, scratched the surface of trying to reach out to our customers, trying to educate them, create a brand awareness for it. And then COVID happened. And so you have this gap, and now we're trying to reach out to customers in a fashion that's not typical of the way we would be able to penetrate the market. And so we had to create new ways of penetrating the market. But then we effectively had to come back and overhaul our efforts into how we create a brand awareness, how we segment the market. We had to change the way we segmented our market, and we had to change the way we reached out to our market. And that involved both digital strategies and non-digital. So, fast forward, we go through this exercise for the last 2 years. But I think the most rewarding moment was last year when we had somebody from the market, an influencer, somebody who actually works for a data-driven company within the industry for business aviation, JetNet. They came back and they said the service we were trying to create an awareness for was Corporate Care Enhanced, which is our long-term maintenance service agreement. And he said 2 years ago, if you asked me what Corporate Care Enhanced was, I couldn't tell you what it was. Now I can tell you the market completely understands it. I know what your value proposition is. And well, I can't get it out of my head. So, it kind of shows you that shift in just the power of marketing and the presence and the way you can penetrate the market.
Excellent. Absolutely.
I totally agree with, everything everyone's saying. It's just, it comes in areas that you really would not expect it. And I hope you don't mind me sharing this example from HAECO. When David and I were working there, they had a very small team working on interiors, and they had just finished building an economy seat. And then the question came, well, what's next? So engineering's like, well, this is simple. We should go more complex, right? We'll make premium economy, we'll make business, we'll keep going more complex. And, that made perfect sense to all the engineers in the room, but then, me and David were saying, they're like, well, is that how the customer buys the seats? Do they only buy economy seats from one company and buy their business class seats from somewhere else? And, and they were like, well, how would we figure that out? Well, there's plenty of ways to figure that out. You just have to be a little creative. And I love that, Heather was mentioning that a lot of people think of marketing and they think advertising, and the creative parts of it. And it's true, there's this whole technical avenue that I would even argue is just as creative, because, it takes one person to maybe do the data analytics, but, without this marketing person that really bridges, that gap and says, here's what it's saying, right? Here's what it means. And, that drives a business decision, right? So even when, we were marketing analysts, which may not be the highest level role. You're doing the research to make real business decisions that affect jobs and people in the direction of an entire, company. So, and, we were at a publicly traded company, so that's a big deal. So you really can't underestimate the effects that, having a strong marketing team and marketing person and, the effects that it can have.
I think that's the unique, for me, the unique part about marketing was it is an absolute blend between a creative side of the world and an analytics side of the world and a data-driven side of the world. And, some people struggle with that, of how you can combine or look at both of those. I found it always fascinating because, I enjoyed the creative side as much as I enjoyed the analytics side. And it is a data that, if you're going to try to enhance the probability that the decision you're making is a good one, it's coming from the data, but it's how you interpret the data. And then you've got the true creative aspect of marketing, which was always, to me, it was always interesting. It was fun. It's where there is no black and white. There truly isn't a black and white answer to it. But again, what you're trying to do there is, reach a market and You know, by reaching that market, you're trying to influence behavior, which ultimately, you know, for all of us is, you know, you're trying to influence demand for your product. And to me, I found all that, you know, over the years, that has just been incredibly fun to go do and incredibly rewarding.
So, you know, for these young folks, as you've seen marketing evolve over the years, where do you guys see it going? I've heard a lot about data and analytics, but you know, in your respective industries, any insights on how this is going to go moving forward?
Oh, man.
I mean, that's the thing with marketing is that sometimes you don't know because you don't know what you don't know. I mean, yeah, 5 years ago, no, 6 or 7 years, 8 years ago, when I got to HAECO, I had to ask for the password recovery on their LinkedIn and Twitter accounts because they didn't think social media was a big deal. And they, why do you need Twitter if we're going to go to the trade show? And since then, we've done everything from targeted geofencing ads to try to find mechanics by targeting aircraft teardown facilities in the desert, so they get an ad on their phone that says HAECO is hiring, come to move to Greensboro where it's not 120 degrees and you can actually work indoors. And then, you know, we're working on, we've put out a new so hey, if you ever go to HAECO.com, don't blame me. Okay, that terrible old website was put together by our corporate, and that's another issue. Is you can't control what corporate will or won't let you do. So we came out with a microsite, 2 microsites, HAECOishiring.com and cabin.haeco.aero, where we actually had Google Analytics, because HAECO.com doesn't even have Google Analytics. They can't even tell you where their users are clicking. So it's a slow sort of incremental evolution. That new technology is, oh well, social media is revolutionary, Chat GPT or whatever it's called, that could make a change, but it's tough to say. Other than that's part of being a good marketer, is to be flexible and ready for what unknown is around the corner. I mean, everyone thought Meta and AI, or sorry, Meta and virtual reality was going to be huge 2 years ago, and now I don't think the stock price of Meta is doing very well. And we're not putting any ads in the whatever metaverse. So I don't know.
Has not been successful.
Well, there's so many new technologies too now that are, I mean, you know, you might go get a job at one of these eVTOL like companies, you might go to Boom, Supersonic. I mean, you know, it's just nobody's really doing it yet. So we have to wait to see, you know, what happens and how they're doing it. And, you know, just really like the next generation of creative, smart people, and see what they're gonna, you know, they're gonna take it and run with it.
Any of y'all have some insights on where things are going in your industries?
Sure. I mean, I think I can give you a little bit of insight into what is at least the focus for the next 5 to 7 years in our industry. I mean, it's very much around the lines of, yeah, data, but making it intelligence. And what does that tell us about our customer, and using that to identify our target markets and working through our market segmentation there. But I think it's about the complete customer journey. So it's more of a digital marketing strategy that's, you know, highly sort of in everyone's focus. It's trying to identify, you know, from how you sort of identify a customer and how a customer is recognized, to how do we create that engagement with the customers, be it social media platforms. I mean, that's very truly fundamentally that we're speaking, but also what are the other areas through which the customer would focus and engage with us? How do we create more engagements, more touch points with them? But then how do you take that data back and interpret, you know, and identify where the customer is interacting, and how do we make that useful to us and turn that to benefit? Integrating with all of our systems. You've got CRM, somebody mentioned CRM over there. So converting those engagement into possible leads, and then eventually converting that into revenue. So it's very much about that customer journey. And of course, that customer journey could morph and change. Coming back to what some of the panelists are saying, that whole journey could change and evolve, and it will evolve over time. But being able to harness that digital, all the power that is there in the digital technology, and being able to convert it into something that's faster, more responsive, and more intelligent.
And I agree with Mega. One of the things that we talk about a lot about the consumer base that just actually uses air travel. And I'm a bit jaded here working for American for 18 years. You all are a bit jaded because you're just within the aviation space. Not everyone jumps on an airplane that often. Many people have gone decades not flying, right? But for that consumer base that does, they generally are more affluent. But what they are poor in is time. And so I would love to go back to my college years and have time to go to the gym and go to happy hours with my colleagues and teammates and whatnot. But you'll find as you graduate, life becomes a little bit more complicated. And so we think about that when we're marketing to our customers in terms of what Megan mentioned, relevance. You've got to be relevant to the customer, but how are you relevant? You have to know them. And so that's where more and more of that data aggregation, and maybe you've heard a little bit about privacy and kind of the roles that are playing in terms of that customer data space. So we're watching that as that can obviously have some impact to how we're communicating with customers. But that data aggregation, as much as it kind of worries some of the privacy advocates, the intent is actually to put up offers that customers actually want and that they value. And it makes it easier for them to interact with whatever business that they're interacting with. And more here at American, we're focused on really making sure that the customer can digitally self-service. And so a big part of that, marketing is involved when you're doing user experience. So a lot of our UX colleagues need to interact with our marketing folks to make sure everything is consistent, that people understand which button should they press, right? Is that kind of consistent with our brand guidelines? Can we get people through the user flow quickly with actually the conversion that we're wanting in terms of, for us, air tickets and ancillaries and things like that. So obviously the data piece is incredibly important, but I also think that speed and ensuring relevance and ease, because obviously if something becomes complicated, you're not going to get that conversion, you're not going to get that person to actually purchase the ticket, so maybe abandon, and that's a lost sale.
That's really important, Heather, the relevance piece, because especially with the fact that there's so much information and the attention span is so tiny, it's how do you make your if marketing, for lack of a better word, but how do you make your pieces stand out faster and quicker and making it more relevant? It's a real challenge. It's very, very challenging, and it's only going to get more challenging.
So a couple of themes here that we kind of got from the panelists. For sure, wide scope, wide lens on various things you can do within marketing. A lot of it involves a balance between left brain and right brain thinking, right? So being able to look at data and analyze it with a critical eye, but also the creative side. David mentioned something, just that notion of knowing that there's people out in the desert that would be qualified to work for us. This might be a really good time to shoot them an ad, right? And to get them to come work for us. So that's not just data analytics, but it's also critical thinking and creativity. And then, of course, coming back to the original quote, the one unifying element to all this is customer, right? It's all about creating and keeping a customer. And so whatever marketing role you have, that's always going to be front and center. And they're all worrying about different ways to make themselves relevant to customers and to keep the customers coming back. And so, I think it's probably a good time just to open it up for you guys. What questions do you have? Any questions you have for panelists? Yes, Claudia.
So kind of going to before you even get into industry, what's one way that you guys mentioned earlier, I was like, oh, it's marketing, it's easy, right? It wasn't easy. How do you kind of set yourself apart from other students at other schools where, it may be a different kind of degree than it is here, and you set yourself apart from those students and put yourself to show them what you know?
Well, I think one thing, and maybe it's not even just specifically germane to marketing, but take advantage while you're here of getting involved. I don't care whether it's clubs, athletics, whatever it might be, but get involved and demonstrate. And we talked about this a lot this morning, one of the classes that Joe and I were in, where, demonstrate that you know how to work as a team, you know, that experience working, whether it's managing or simply being part of the team is huge, because there isn't any place you're going to go when you leave here that you're not going to walk into an organization of some sort where functioning and understanding how to function as a team becomes incredibly important. And if you can demonstrate that, hey, while I was at Embry-Riddle, I did this and I did this and I participated in this, that starts to set you apart from someone that may have the same technical skills. And when it comes right down to, you know, when we look at a resume and you look at the technical skills, you're looking at that as almost table stakes, because in a lot of our organizations, somewhere HR did some initial screening to go, okay, these are the folks that meet kind of the minimum requirements you guys said you were looking for. It's the other things, the softer skills, the things that demonstrates that you're willing to go put extra effort in. You know, you're willing to be involved. Those are the types of things on the initial side that I think really, you know, can differentiate, because at the end, you know, it's this piece of paper and this piece of paper that someone might be looking at. And why is this one stand out over this one when it might be the same degree, same program, but, you know, here's somebody that appears to, you know, have a bit more initiative, maybe, you know, a bit more desire to be involved.
Hey, Rick, if I could just jump in, I 100% agree. For us, when we're looking and we see someone has been, so I was on the golf team at Embry-Riddle. If we see that someone has team sports or is part of a team, that speaks volumes. I know a lot of people think about, hey, as I'm putting together my resume or I'm putting together my list of accomplishments, it's more about, hey, look at me, look at me, look at what I did. More and more, we want to see, hey, maybe you brought an idea to the table, but you're actually incredible with getting a group of people to actually move towards that idea or execute that idea. So the more that we can see that you are effective in terms of being part of a team, effective at moving ideas forward, those things are differentiators for sure.
I like that, you know, your question, because I think it kind of is asking us too about advice. And that was one of the things we were all, you know, thinking about, you know, what advice would we, you know, share with you. And I was thinking I had a couple for you, if I'm allowed to share. I think one of the most important things that I've learned in my career is, you know, to develop a network. I haven't ever gotten a job because of my resume. I got a job because of the people I knew.
Yeah.
And and you know, most of the time I was asked to come apply because they had either worked with me before or they knew my skill set. So I would say develop a network, build it, maintain it, grow it. And I would say make sure it's a diverse network. So don't just pick people like you, right? Find people in other industries, find people at different levels in you know, their careers. And I would say get a mentor, right? You should have several mentors. I have mentors, you know, throughout my career, and, you know, some of them I would even say are less experienced and younger than me. And that doesn't mean anything. You know, I've learned so much from them over the years, and I think it's really important. The other piece of, you know, the other piece of advice I wanted to impart was that this industry is tiny. So you should make friends, not enemies, because the first thing, you know, if I get a resume and they worked at HAECO, I'm calling David. I'm going to find out who they are. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to ask, you know, about their performance. And, you know, we do it everywhere, right? We'll know everybody. So there's no reason to burn bridges, make a lot of friends.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things, you know, looking at this, you know, over a 40 years plus span, and we talk about how big the industry is, and it really is a big industry, you know, when you look at aviation and aerospace. but it's also a very connected and in some ways, you know, it just seems like a very small industry in that, you know, the opportunities to network are great. The people that, you know, you work with, and then, you know, you may go, well, okay, I've moved on to something else. I'll never cross paths again. You cross paths and you wind up leaning on them again, working with them again, leveraging it again. It's just the way the industry is. And, you know, I know we see it, you know, and maybe it's a little bit more right on my lap at EAA. You know, every year that we do AirVenture and the industry kind of comes to us, and the community comes to us, but it is amazing how small at times the industry feels, and how many times, you know, you cross paths.
Any other questions from you guys? Don't be shy. All right, Trayvon.
After alumni from Embry-Riddle, what is one thing that Embry-Riddle does differently compared to other universities?
So
Can you guys just repeat? Sorry, it's hard to hear their questions.
oh, the question, what does Embry-Riddle do differently than other universities as an alumni? And having been involved with the school for a while, I've seen it, I'll be honest, change quite a bit. When I started in 1999, it was sort of, you went here because you really wanted to be a pilot, and your dad was a pilot, and you go home every weekend to hang out with your friends because there was nothing to do here. Now I look around and you guys got stuff to do. Oh my gosh. But I think what sets Embry-Riddle apart is its specificity for the mission of aviation and aerospace. And that doesn't mean you have to spend the rest of your life in aviation or aerospace. In fact, I plan not to. But when I look at a resume, or when my resume was looked at, and I got my first job, my first real job as an analyst at Volvo Aero, I was hired because I had an aeronautical background from Embry-Riddle, and oh, that's neat, you're getting a bachelor's in marketing from St. Leo. They're more interested in the idea that I already know systems and components and everything there is to know about an airplane, which is going to make it easier to train me up on how to be an analyst and how to figure out used part prices and target customers and how to find the end user instead of a broker. Then when I went to be Aerospace, I didn't have experience in aircraft seating or interiors, but it was easy to learn forecasting because I understood market drivers and economics and the economics of flight. I knew what capacity versus traffic was, and I could turn that into a regression model, and which turned into the forecast, which turned into the top line revenue forecast, which ended up in the 10K and annual report. And I just remember thinking, when I was working in, I don't know, it was 2007 or 8, and the earnings release was coming up with all the major banks, JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley. I'm thinking to myself, if these analysts knew that the top line revenue forecast from this publicly traded company with a 3-year outlook came from a kid in a cubicle in Winston-Salem, they would not have any idea. But but if it wasn't for that underlying knowledge from Embry-Riddle, that's what you're getting. That's why you're here. That's why you're different.
I think about it. It doesn't matter whether it's been EAA, ATA, Midway. When that resume comes from somebody at Embry-Riddle, it does set it apart, because we expect that you can hit the ground running and start to contribute faster than somebody that comes into the industry that doesn't know the industry at all. And that is a differentiator for all of us.
If I may, I'm just, everything that all of the panelists says holds true. I mean, I work for an aerospace company, and, we've got Embry-Riddle is definitely one of the top schools that when we see students graduating from there, you can hit the ground running, and that you understand the industry. There's something else I think that also stands out about Embry-Riddle. I've actually come back to Embry-Riddle to recruit year on year. I was doing that regularly until COVID happened, and then we changed our recruiting strategy. But We were coming as part of Rolls-Royce every year to I think the October Korea Expo. Anyhow, there is something to be said about Embry-Riddle graduates. There is a quality, there is a work ethic, but also I think it's just fundamentally understood. If you're at Embry-Riddle, you have a passion for aviation, or at the very least, you have a passion about something at the university. You're there because there's a purpose, there's an intention, and that in itself creates a drive that helps the students stand out from anybody else. I think that's just a simple way to put it. And so, you know you're going to meet a certain level of caliber and work ethic, and yeah, you just stand out. The students stand out.
I always remember the career fairs in October, because in October 2005, all of the South Florida aerospace companies missed it because we got clobbered by Hurricane Wilma. So
Oh.
thanks for the flashback.
You guys getting some good advice, because we have some of our social media team is here, and they work under Patrick Hurley here, our technology manager, and they do an amazing job. And two things already that they've talked about that you guys can emphasize in your resume. One, teamwork, right? You know how to work in a team, and two, you got the aviation knowledge, right? So can't imagine a firm, an airline, private aviation group not being interested in you based on those two factors alone, right? And so that really should be a part of what you seek to put in your resume and talk about in your interviews. Anything in the digital landscape will be good for you guys. So other questions for you? Yes, Nick.
What are the holes and the problems that the marketing space is currently experiencing? And what do you think could be potential solutions to some of those factors?
I think of sustainability almost immediately. One of the things that doesn't jump out about, airplanes is, how environmentally friendly they are. And I think there's a big, opportunity right now and lots of avenues to take, lots of spaces. I've seen on airline websites, you go to book an airline ticket, and there are some airlines that will offer you to, pay extra and offset, some of the carbon costs, and they do something, right? I'm not familiar with it, but, not only is there an opportunity there for people like, companies like Collins that make seats, we're looking at all kinds of recycled materials and composite materials and lighter and, more environmentally friendly practices. We have lavatories, there's a lot of, really great opportunities to make some of the chemicals used a lot more environmentally friendly or more sustainable, or even, when we had COVID, there's lots of, avenues to go cleaner, right? More hygienic with all kinds of antibacterial coatings and things like that. So there are always holes, and I would say that's just one.
Yeah, so this came up in a class that I was in talking to the other day. This whole green thing, and by the way, I am a very green person, and I recycle literally everything, and Paula knows this about me. But I did so the green fad with airlines came around in 2006 and 2007, which when oil was over $150 a barrel. And the airlines wanted to be green, but no, they didn't want to be green. They wanted to burn less gas. Let's be honest. They wanted to spend less money on gas. So I did some research. I got out my old flight computer, and I found if you're one human being, if you're one person, and you need to get from, I'll use an American example, from Charlotte to Miami, and you own a Toyota Prius, what's the green thing to do? Take the Prius or fly? Fly. When you're flying, you're getting about 75 miles a gallon. The Prius gets about 50. And I don't know why the airlines don't talk more about that. And I know that the
marketing opportunity.
Right, and I don't know the engine manufacturers with the new engine types that are much greener. And being a cynical pilot, I think it's going to be a long time before we see sustainable aviation fuel or electric jets taking people across the Atlantic. I think that there's a missed opportunity to talk about what we're already doing and pat ourselves on the back for the progress we've already made.
I agree.
But I think, Scott, I think that's one of the, when you look at, marketing challenges, it's part of how the environment is changing. It is, the expectations of customers are changing, not around just simply what they expect of your product, but of how your organization behaves. And that's something that, you look back, 10, 15, 20 years ago, that wasn't necessarily a consideration. And now it is, and not among every consumer, but among a large percent. And so you can't, again, it goes back to marketing. Those are the kinds of things you can't ignore. You've got to take that into consideration and go, okay, so, how do we need to talk about what we do and how we do that so it resonates with that person that wants to, patronize a socially responsible, organization. But that's what the cool part to me of marketing is you're constantly faced with those kinds of things, and you're constantly adapting, and you're constantly saying, well, how are the expectations of the customer changing? And what do I need to do in terms of how we are, talking about, the organization, positioning the organization. And the cool part about marketing is we get involved in a lot of the major changes that goes on in organizations. Marketing gets tapped an awful lot to lead programs and projects. And it's, those are the things that in the end, ultimately change direction of organizations and that. And they're just plain fun to be part of.
So a couple more things we just hit on too that I definitely want to point out, that we talk about this in sales bus, right? That boundary spanning role that you play in marketing. So not just with the customer, but internally working with various different groups. You've heard them talk about working with engineers, working with strategists, right? Working with finance and accounting folks. You're going to have to do that if you're marketing, because you're going to have your hands in lots of pots and lots of different projects that you'll be involved in. So any other questions from you guys?
So if there's one thing that I think got missed that popped into my head that I wanted to come back to is sometimes marketing is knowing when to say no. I can think of two examples. I'll be brief. I can think of, I was in 2008 on the interstate heading to Charlotte to fly to the NBAA, and my boss called me and said, we need to redo the forecast because the economy was going south. And I was responsible for the business jet forecast, had a model with every business jet, all the interiors, and came back and we redid the forecast based on the latest model, went down to the business jet facility in Miami. And one of the sales guys said to me, yeah, but this means we're going to have to reduce headcount even more. And I realized that my forecast would result in layoffs. And every time I went back to the facility, there were fewer and fewer cars in the parking lot, but we had to save the business.
Yep.
There was another time Paul and I were working on a project. There was a new seat design that someone was pitching to HAECO, and they had all these fantastical ideas about how many they would sell and how much customers love it, but the customer data, almost every single person that tested the seat identified one specific patented feature. I can't mention what it was. I'll let you guess. Was a deal breaker. Answer is no. Sometimes it's better not to go down an R&D route than to go down it and find out that there was not a market to begin with. So anyway, I don't want to end it on my negative, but I meant to say that earlier.
No, sure. Anything else anybody wants to ask or add in? Any other thoughts of advice for these young folks? I've heard from a couple of you. You got your positions through going to the career fairs, and that's definitely helpful, right? But other thoughts or advice?
Yeah, I think I'll jump in here. I'd say keep an open mind. Don't narrow your vision of what you think is an ideal marketing job. if, you know, like you've heard already, and I know Scott, you just mentioned it, but it's a transferable skill set. You've got several areas you can apply yourselves. You've seen the left and right brain, you know, applies. I'd say keep an open mind as you're going out there.
Yeah, and Scott, I agree with that completely. And you know, when you look for that initial, you know, job out there, as Mega said, you know, have an open mind. Also look for those kinds of opportunities when you walk out of here where you're going to get broad exposure to things. I mean, you know, and that doesn't mean that, you know, going to work for a real large company and having a very narrow responsibility is a bad thing. I mean, you're going to get exposure to the organization. But where you can find opportunities, especially those initial ones, where you're exposed to a lot of facets of marketing. There may be elements of marketing that you would then gravitate towards and say, well, that really is a cool part. I love the communication side or the media relations side or the advertising side or the analytics side. But having exposure to that when you leave here is a big deal. And so, you know, we were talking in the atrium last night, and one of our board members is Andy Priester, and their family, you know, were the original owners of Milwaukee Airport, which is now Chicago Executive. Well, you know, he said, hey, I've got a marketing coordinator position open. And in the scope of the industry, you know, Priester Aviation isn't the largest fish out there. But if you go look at what that position would afford somebody to do experience-wise, you know, it is a wide exposure to what marketing is all about, which can then be either a jumping off point or it may lead to more there. But just be open-minded. I mean, I think what Mega said is huge. Look at the industry itself. You know, every player in the industry is doing marketing in some facet or another. And which means there's all kinds of opportunities out there.
Absolutely, Rick. Let me just add a little example for context. So one of the roles, and this was part of the leadership program. So this is when I was told to take roles for like 6 months to a year, which means you could afford to experiment a little bit. But I will say this, I deliberately chose something that was not in the sphere or didn't seem to be in the sphere of business, customer service, sales, marketing. And it was it was titled as business development, but it was in the manufacturing side of Rolls-Royce. So all of a sudden I found myself completely deep in manufacturing methods. I had an express learning curve in understanding CNC milling and all the different machines and how we manufacture rotative parts, which are some of the most complicated parts in a jet engine. And why was I learning all of these things? Because effectively at the end of this, I had to put together a evaluation of whether or not the Southeast Asia region was going to be a feasible location for a rotatives manufacturing plant. And this is a complete detour from what a role that is something I would not have considered originally. I did not think it would lead for me to be presenting to executives and basically influencing the decision for the business on whether or not to open up what was the most complex manufacturing plant in a part of the world. And oh, by the way, I influenced, you know, a certain one way or another, but ultimately the analysis that I did, or we did, it was a team member and I, but the analysis that we did and we put together in front of the executives facilitated them to decide one way or another. So you just don't know where it's going to take you. And again, that was once again a marketing role. It was looking at the data. It was trying to understand the feasibility. It was creating a feasibility study. So you just don't know where your role is going to take you, but almost everything I think includes principles of marketing.
Absolutely. And I'd add that I definitely agreed to everything that the panelists have said. Internships, if you can do them, do them. But also use the opportunity, like we all mentioned, it is a small group, the aviation field. And so whether it be kind of, let's say you come do an internship in revenue management at American Airlines, use the time to meet other people and other groups at the company. Don't just like obviously do the work of the internship, but use that time to really get a flavor and an understanding of what are the different things that the company as a whole is tackling. We talked a little bit in our prior meeting. There's not one time that you're not going to be talking to finance to get anything done, probably at whatever company you're going to be with. And so if any of you end up sitting in that finance seat, it's good that you actually have an understanding of what's happening and what the requests are from the other parts of the business. You can help move the company faster. For a lot of us, the faster we can get to the good outcomes, the faster we can get things in the market. You definitely create those step changes compared to your competition. And so the more well-rounded you can be, the better outcomes for both yourself and your company, and that will help propel your career.
Thank you, Heather. So any final questions before we wrap it up? Okay. Well, I'll make a plug. So we got this new program. And so the other thing kind of coming out of this, if you're not sure, I mean, heaven forbid at your age, you might be unsure of what direction you want to go into. That's the broad scope of marketing is really a good thing to consider because of the opportunities. And I'll just share one quick story that I think Heather will appreciate. A lot of students don't realize, but when you start at an airline, usually the best entryway point or the most prominent is you're going to go into network planning, right? Pricing, which I think Heather came into, or schedule development. And guess what? All three roles fall under marketing for any given airline that you go to work with. And I worked in schedule development for a while, and literally, when you're trying to figure out which aircraft turns to the other, and if you made sure that your maintenance time is there. I went to my manager at one point and said, why are we not in operations? This feels like an operations role, and she just kind of looked at me and was like, we don't have customers coming in the door. None of what you're doing matters at all, right? So that's, at the end of this, it is about customers, creating, keeping customers. And we appreciate you coming and spending time with us and listening about the roles of marketing. And I'm sure they'll stick around for a few minutes if you want to talk with them individually, and we'll wrap it up for that. So, all right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.